I thought this would be an interesting one to kind of finish up on for councils because verge waste, clean-up waste, is pertinent to all of us. And I thought, well, this will be pretty good. Not much science has been done around verge waste. I'll just find out all the stats and reports that are out there, and I'll bang this together in a couple of days and really kind of have something to contribute. Well, what did I know? There is no data on verge waste. It is absolutely sporadic. And so what I've tried to do is pull together the data that does exist into some themes. So I'll race through it, happy to take questions. You know, we all know that resource recovery, recycling is increasing. That's the green line. Waste to landfill is kind of stagnant now, which is for the first time in a long time. It's actually starting to trend down in New South Wales. And that verge waste is part of that material going to landfill by and large. We have targets, excellent. And we have this stream over here that when you look at all the other containers that we talk about, you know, 33% in the red bin, 17% of all what a household generates is curbside recyclables, and 50% is potentially food and garden organics. So in an ideal world, you would recover that 17, the 50. Well, what about the 9 that's sitting out called hard waste? And very little work has been done on the recovery of that stream. So I thought, well, all right, we'll have a crack at that. Let's first talk about nomenclature. There's 50 different names. I've just picked the first 4. Bulky waste, clean up, hard waste and verge waste. I actually prefer verge waste because it can't get confused with any of the other streams that people talk about, but that's a personal view. So I'm going to call it verge waste for the rest of this session. And then there are a couple of systems, on-call or on-demand, scheduled or blanket, as it's called in some states. And I'm not talking about tip vouchers in this presentation. So what is verge waste? I'm sure you all know it, or won't go through it. And some exceptions and what's not allowed in verge waste. All right, Australia generates about 53 million tonnes of waste, excluding fly ash. Verge waste is about 9% of household waste. It's about 1.2 million tonnes a year, and an average cost of landfilling in Australia, that's about $120 million that we're investing in verge waste collections. It's quite a significant amount of money. And if you look at some of the Victorian statistics, there's a significant opportunity for low-cost recycling of that material. 24% of presented verge waste in Victoria was reusable, and another 50% of it was recyclable. So the question is, all right, how do we take use of this opportunity? And to put it another way, many of you will have seen this slide before. It's, you know, governments love the things around the outside, the fairly trivial waste streams, plastic bags, tyres, computers, printed cartridges, even container deposit schemes, TVs, computers. That all amounts to about 1.2%, or 1.2 million tonnes, about 4% of Australia's waste to landfill. Verge waste alone is of the same magnitude. So, all right, we spend an awful lot of political time on those small streams. Why don't we have a good crack at verge waste? So what do the points tell us? The data's rubbish. That's not a pun. Estimated average generation rate, about 78 kilograms per household per year. Average recycling rate across the country, 11%. Interesting, this next one. On-call generates twice the weight per service, but fewer people participate in on-call services. When participation is taken into account, the yield is the same between those two streams. Now that's really important because when we come to the modelling later, you say, all right, which is better, to have more people involved producing fewer tonnes or fewer people producing more tonnes? And it makes a big impact on cost. And then I've put a few stats in there for those of you who want to pursue it a bit further. 85% of material put on the curb was community recycling, pilfering, scavenging, whatever you want to call it, in Victoria. 24% of the material stream reusable. And that would be 20,000 tonnes that Victorians could divert tomorrow if it was promoted as reusable material. So here's some stats taken from all of the studies that I could find. There's probably 50 councils in this, but none of it, or very little of it, published. And you can see the kind of recycling rate there in bold of about 11%, and the kilograms per household per year at the bottom, 92, 60, 70 and 90. And interestingly, WA actually has some targets to try and reduce the verge waste below 70 kilos per household per year. I'm not quite sure why you want to reduce it. What you want to do is acknowledge that it's coming out and then recycle it. And thankfully, they've backed it up with a 50% target to try and recycle it. And they're at 12%. But at least they've named a target and said, all right, we've got an objective here. And why is it worth looking at? Well, because the recycling rates are so low, because you can recycle it for very little money. Community reuse, that willingness is out there already. Plenty of politicians and councillors hate the different clean-up systems, and so does the community. So what's the best way to do it? Well, we had a crack at some maths. Charles Sturt did some, well, what do people think? So this is the first one. All residents preferred on-call. That seems to be nationally, the evidence is that all residents prefer on-call, particularly multi-unit dwelling residences. Now, I couldn't find much stats around preferences by MUDs, except this one, but there's a very significant preference for on-call. Oh, by the way, I should have defined scheduled. Scheduled is everyone in the suburb sticks it out on the same day and the truck runs up and down every street, whether it's out or not. So it passes lots of what I'd call futile houses, where it's not picking anything up. Whereas on call, you ring in at your behest as a resident and the truck comes to you and then to the next person that booked it and the next person that booked it. That's a key distinction. So for scheduled services, where all the whole street gets it, there's plenty of futile collections. In other words, you're not picking anything up at that house. Whereas on call, by definition, you're going to every house that wanted the service. And that has a big effect on cost. Scheduled or on call, I've just described that. And what's the percentages across the country? Western Australia, by and large, still uses scheduled services. Most others have gone to on-call services. And there's definitely a trend towards on-call as opposed to the scheduled services. There is massive variability in the data. On-call services tend to be mostly where there's transient population. So those communities, Waverley, that have a lot of transient people tend to have moved to on-call earlier. The number of services, Perth offers once a year, Adelaide 2 a year, some councils 4 a year, multi-unit dwellings 12 a year, City of Sydney 52 a year, North Sydney 26 a year. Now, find the pattern in that, that's why there's no average, because it wouldn't make any sense. There's a massive variability. On call, as I mentioned, fewer people participate, but the households generate more. So a couple of sources. Half as many households use on-call. That's from 9 councils in Western Australia, and 28% on average use on-call services versus 61 using scheduled service. So a lot more people use scheduled services, but they put out less waste. A lot of people say, well, you get more recycling if you have a scheduled service so people can pilfer through it and collect more and it does more community recycling. The evidence doesn't support that at all. Where the big diversion rates are is when your contract specifies that the collector must recycle. And there is no link between the type of service and the actual recycling rate. The thing that drives recycling is, did you as a council specify that some of this material must be recycled? If you did that, you can get up to 50% recovery rate. So it's not about which system you use, scheduled or on call, it's about whether you specify that as an outcome in your contract. Okay, so we did some modelling. Scheduled versus on call, just to have a look at what the options would be. A whole lot of factors down the left-hand side, lifts, kilos, volume, weights. I won't bore you with all the detail. Let's just jump to the results. Scheduled services cost more because you're driving by all those houses with futile services and you're stopping for lots of little bits of waste. Whereas when you go to an on-call, they've gone to the effort of booking it, they've put lots of stuff out, they're going to milk it for everything it's worth, and probably go over the maximum 3 metre cubic metre control, but that's a different issue which I'm not dealing with here. But by and large, if it's scheduled, you get lots of small services, whereas if it's on-call, you get a few big ones. It's more efficient to pick up a few big ones in a truck that's costing you $120 per truck hour than stopping lots and lots of times. That's the simple maths behind this. You'll see that the disposal is the same because you're collecting the same amount of waste. the fixed price is the same for the dead run to the landfill and back after you've filled the truck up. What's different is how much time you're spending labour driving around the suburbs. That's the only factor that's really different between them. All right, and a couple of councils in WA found exactly that pattern. I won't bore you with their deal. And this is tendered. These are tendered results from 12 different tenderers who submitted. A couple of last slides. There is one alternative I wanted to post here, that the not-for-profit model. On average, most companies are paying the award rate $29, $30 per truck hour. The alternative is, if you're using an on-call, or a schedule for that matter, but it works best with on-call, if your labour rates are less than about $13 an hour, then it's worth sending 2 trucks out and get the first load to collect the mattresses, the reusables, whatever, in a Pantech, and the next one re-lift, crunch the stuff up and send it to landfill. So you can afford to run a 2-truck system, although the collection costs ostensibly are twice as much, so long as the labour costs are less than half. So if you look at some of the not-for-profit models around the country at the moment, their net labour costs are less than half of $30 or around $13, and that's because they're getting public subsidies, long-term unemployment benefits for grants, etc., for their schemes. And that obviously gets you closer to that 50% diversion rate. Now, you're obviously going to pay more if you specify 50% and it's a standard operator. This is an option for getting recycling 50% recovery rates, but at what would have otherwise been a tendered price. So the conclusions. On-call is emerging as the preferred method. The same total tonnage is collected as scheduled. More tonnes per house, but fewer houses. Better customer interaction, cheaper for council. Same recycling rate as scheduled, so long as it's specified. And it reduces truck movements up and down the suburbs. So by and large, our conclusion was you're better to go on call and have a good look at that not-for-profit model while you're at it. Thank you.